My name is Brooke Harrison, and I'm 26 years old. Standing on my childhood doorstep with nothing but a small suitcase, I listened to my mother's voice piercing through the evening air like broken glass. "You're a disgrace to this family," she screamed, her face twisted with a rage I'd never seen before. I had just lost my job at the most prestigious law firm in the city, accused of leaking confidential client information. Coming home for support seemed natural, but as I stood there watching my mother's hateful expression, I realized this wasn't going to be the sanctuary I desperately needed. The worst part wasn't her words or even the neighbors peering through their windows. It was the moment I saw Whitney, my half-sister, standing behind Mom with tears streaming down her face, playing the perfect victim once again. But what I didn't know yet was that Mom had been expecting me, and she'd already prepared for this exact moment. Before we dive into this nightmare that became my reality, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below and don't forget to hit that like button if you've ever felt completely betrayed by the people who were supposed to love you most. Make sure to subscribe because this story gets darker before it gets better, and trust me, you won't want to miss how this family drama unfolds. Now, let me tell you exactly how my perfect life crumbled in a single day. The accusation that destroyed my career came out of nowhere on a Tuesday morning. My supervisor called me into his office with a stack of printed emails allegedly sent from my company account to our biggest competitor. The documents contained confidential information about our client's merger plans, worth millions in insider knowledge. I stared at those papers in complete shock because I had never sent those emails, never even opened those files. But there was my digital signature, my employee ID, everything perfectly documented to make me look guilty. What I didn't know then was that Whitney, my 24-year-old half-sister who worked at the competing firm, had orchestrated this entire setup. She had somehow gained access to my login credentials during our last family dinner when I carelessly left my laptop open while helping Mom in the kitchen. The termination was swift and brutal. Security escorted me out while my colleagues watched in stunned silence, whispering among themselves about how they never suspected I could be capable of such betrayal. My 7-year career at Henderson, Klein and Associates vanished in 30 minutes. The firm's reputation was everything, and they couldn't afford to be associated with someone accused of corporate espionage. I tried explaining that I was being framed, but who would believe such a convenient excuse? The evidence looked ironclad, and my protests sounded like desperate lies from someone caught red-handed. Walking to my car with my personal belongings in a cardboard box, I felt like a criminal even though I knew I was innocent. Driving to my parents' house, I rehearsed how I would explain everything to Mom and Dad. Surely they would believe me, support me, help me figure out who had done this to me. I expected shock, concern, maybe anger at the injustice of it all. Instead, when I walked through the front door, I found Mom waiting in the living room with her arms crossed and an expression of pure disgust on her face. "So it's true," she said before I could even speak. "Richard told me everything." Whitney called him crying, saying the whole family is going to be humiliated because of your greed. That's when I realized the setup was far more elaborate than I'd imagined. Whitney hadn't just framed me at work, she'd already poisoned my own family against me. The confrontation escalated quickly when Dad came home from his accounting firm. Richard Harrison, a man who had always prided himself on his moral integrity, looked at me like I was a stranger who had invaded his home. "How could you do this to us?" he demanded, his voice shaking with disappointment. "Do you have any idea what this means for our family's reputation in this community?" I tried to explain about the frame-up, about how none of this made sense, but every word I spoke seemed to make them angrier. Whitney appeared from the kitchen where she'd been hiding, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She ran to Dad's arms sobbing about how embarrassed she felt at her own job, how people were asking if our family could be trusted. The scene that followed will haunt me forever. Mom slapped me across the face right there in front of Dad and Whitney, the sound echoing through our house like a gunshot. "Get out," she hissed through clenched teeth. "I won't have a thief living under my roof." Dad immediately went to their shared laptop and transferred all the money from our family emergency account where I had contributed thousands of dollars over the years for family vacations and unexpected expenses. "You'll get nothing from us," he declared, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "We're cutting all ties until you make this right." Whitney watched this entire scene with satisfaction gleaming in her eyes, occasionally wiping away crocodile tears and murmuring things like, "I can't believe Brooke would hurt us like this." The final blow came when Mom forbade me from contacting Tyler, my 18-year-old brother who was away at college. Tyler had always been my closest family member, the one person who understood me completely and supported my ambitions. "You're not going to corrupt him too," Mom announced, blocking my number on Tyler's phone right in front of me. "He needs to focus on his studies, not deal with the shame of having a criminal sister." As I packed my belongings, I could hear Whitney consoling our parents in the kitchen, promising them that she would help repair the family's damaged reputation. The manipulation was so perfect, so complete, that even I started to question my own memory of events. Standing on that doorstep with my suitcase, I realized that my half-sister had just executed the most devastating betrayal I could ever imagine, and she had turned my own parents into her accomplices. Finding myself suddenly homeless at 26 felt surreal and terrifying. I couldn't afford a hotel with my limited savings, especially not knowing how long I'd be unemployed. My best friend Jasmine allowed me to sleep on the couch in her downtown design studio for the first week, but I could sense her discomfort growing each day. She kept asking probing questions about what really happened at the firm, and I started noticing how she checked her phone constantly, as if she was reporting my movements to someone. What I didn't realize was that Whitney had already begun phase 2 of her campaign to destroy me completely. After exhausting Jasmine's hospitality, I moved into the Sunset Motel on the outskirts of town, a depressing place with stained carpets and flickering neon lights. The weekly rate consumed most of my remaining savings, but it was the only accommodation I could afford while job hunting. The room smelled of cigarettes and desperation, with paper-thin walls that let me hear every argument and intimate moment from neighboring rooms. I spent hours each day sending out resumes and cover letters, trying to rebuild my legal career from the ashes of my reputation. But every law firm I contacted seemed to already know about my ethical violations before I even completed my application. The systematic destruction of my professional prospects became clear during my third week of unemployment. When I called the personnel director at Morrison & Associates, she hesitated before telling me that they had received concerning information about my background from a reliable source in the industry. The source had provided detailed documentation of my alleged corporate espionage, along with personal character references that painted me as untrustworthy and volatile. I begged for more specifics, but the woman politely declined to elaborate and suggested I might want to consider a career change. Similar conversations happened at every firm I contacted, as if someone had systematically contacted every potential employer in the legal community. My suspicions were confirmed when I finally confronted Jasmine about her strange behavior. After several drinks at a coffee shop near her studio, she broke down and admitted that Whitney had approached her 2 weeks earlier. Whitney had invited Jasmine for an expensive dinner at the city's most exclusive restaurant and spent 3 hours explaining how I had always been jealous and unstable. She showed Jasmine fabricated text messages where I allegedly threatened to ruin the family business and painted herself as a terrified victim who was only trying to protect everyone from my increasingly erratic behavior. Whitney had even offered to help Jasmine find new clients through her professional network if she would keep tabs on me and report my activities. The betrayal cut deeper than anything my family had done because Jasmine had been my closest friend for 8 years. We had supported each other through college, celebrated career victories together, and shared our deepest secrets and fears. But Whitney's manipulation had been so skillful, so convincing, that even Jasmine started believing I might actually be capable of corporate espionage. "She seemed so genuinely afraid of you," Jasmine explained through tears. "She showed me articles about family members who turn violent when their careers fall apart. I got scared and thought maybe I didn't know the real you." Discovering that my best friend had been spying on me and feeding information to my enemy left me feeling more isolated than I'd ever experienced in my life. Whitney's second major attack came through a private investigator she had hired to document my decline. The man had been photographing me coming and going from the motel, capturing images of me looking disheveled and desperate as I searched for work. These photos were then sent to Mom with a note expressing Whitney's concern about my mental health and living situation. According to the investigator's report, I was associating with criminals and addicts at the motel and showing signs of substance abuse and prostitution. The lies were so outrageous that I initially thought Mom would see through them, but Whitney had been so thorough in her character assassination that even these obvious fabrications seemed plausible to our parents. Sitting alone in that horrible motel room on a Friday night, surrounded by rejection letters and empty takeout containers, I came closer to giving up than ever before. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the constant stress had triggered panic attacks that left me gasping for air and doubting my own sanity. Whitney had successfully isolated me from my family, my best friend, and any hope of professional redemption. She had turned my entire support system against me and convinced everyone I loved that I was dangerous and untrustworthy. For the first time in my life, I seriously considered just disappearing entirely, maybe moving to another state and starting over with a completely new identity. The woman who had once been confident and successful felt broken beyond repair, and I couldn't see any way to fight back against such a perfectly orchestrated campaign of destruction. My salvation came from the most unexpected source when Carson Mitchell walked into the motel lobby on a rainy Thursday morning. Carson, a 62-year-old attorney with silver hair and weathered hands, had worked with Dad 20 years ago on several business deals before retiring from corporate law. He found me in the diner next to the motel, staring at my laptop screen and mechanically eating stale coffee and dry toast. "Brooke Harrison?" he asked, sliding into the booth across from me without invitation. "I've been looking for you ever since I heard about what happened at Henderson Klein." His presence confused me because I barely remembered meeting him during my childhood, but his kind eyes and genuine concern felt like the first honest interaction I'd experienced in weeks. Carson explained that he'd maintained friendships throughout the legal community and had been hearing disturbing rumors about my case. Several attorneys had mentioned receiving detailed warnings about my criminal behavior from an unnamed source who claimed to be protecting them from a dangerous candidate. The consistency of these warnings and their obvious coordination had raised red flags for Carson, who remembered me as a bright and ethical young woman from our brief previous encounters. "Someone is running a very sophisticated campaign to destroy your reputation," he said, pulling out a notebook filled with meticulous observations. "And I suspect I know why this is happening to you and your family." The truth Carson revealed was more devastating than anything I had imagined. Through his investigation into our family's finances, he had discovered that Dad was drowning in debt from bad investments and failed business ventures. Richard had been hiding mounting losses from Mom for months, desperately seeking ways to avoid bankruptcy and the humiliation it would bring to our family's standing in the community. Whitney had somehow learned about Dad's financial crisis and had approached him with a solution that seemed too good to refuse. She offered to use her connections in the corporate world to help him secure lucrative consulting contracts that could eliminate his debt entirely. But Whitney's assistance came with strings attached that Dad hadn't understood at the time. She had maneuvered herself into a position where she controlled access to these opportunities, making herself indispensable to our family's financial survival. Carson suspected that Whitney was planning something far more sinister than just destroying my career. She was positioning herself to inherit everything when our parents passed away by becoming their financial savior and proving herself as the more trustworthy daughter. My destruction wasn't personal revenge but rather a calculated business decision to eliminate competition for our family's assets and loyalty. Whitney's third major attack came just as I was beginning to feel hope about Carson's support. Using sophisticated email spoofing techniques, she created messages that appeared to come from my personal account and sent threatening correspondence to several of my former colleagues at Henderson Klein. The emails contained detailed personal information about their families and subtle threats about paying the price for ruining my career. The messages were crafted to sound like they came from someone experiencing a psychological breakdown, filled with paranoid accusations and increasingly unhinged demands for vindication. The consequences were swift and terrifying. Within hours of those emails being sent, I received a call from Detective Sarah Chen at the City Police Department asking me to come in for questioning about harassment charges. My former supervisor had filed a formal complaint claiming that I was stalking and threatening former colleagues in violation of the restraining order that Henderson Klein had quietly obtained against me. The detective's tone was professional but cold, and she made it clear that this was a serious criminal investigation that could result in felony charges if I continued this pattern of escalating behavior. Even worse than the legal implications was the psychological warfare Whitney had orchestrated around our family's social circle. She organized an elaborate birthday party for Mom at the country club, inviting every important family friend and community leader under the pretense of celebrating our mother's 60th birthday. But the real purpose was to announce that I had disappeared after my termination and that the family was desperately worried about my mental health and safety. Whitney played the role of the concerned daughter perfectly, tearfully asking guests to contact the family if they saw me anywhere, claiming that I had been making disturbing threats and might be dangerous to myself or others. The party achieved exactly what Whitney intended. It established a narrative where I was the unstable family member who had vanished after committing crimes, while she was the loving daughter holding everyone together during a crisis. By the time I learned about this gathering from Carson's sources, the story had already spread throughout our social community. People who had known me since childhood now viewed me as a tragic cautionary tale about how career pressure can drive someone to criminal behavior and mental collapse. Whitney had successfully rewritten history so that my absence looked like guilt and flight rather than exile and persecution. The final blow in this phase came when Tyler stopped responding to my attempts to contact him through social media and mutual friends. Whitney had convinced him that my threats against the family were escalating and that maintaining contact with me was putting him in danger. She showed him screenshots of the fake threatening emails and convinced him that I was stalking our parents and planning to hurt them financially or physically. Tyler, who had always seen the best in everyone, couldn't reconcile the sister he loved with the evidence Whitney presented, so he chose to protect our parents by cutting off all communication with me. Losing Tyler's support felt like losing my last connection to the person I used to be, and I realized that Whitney's campaign wasn't just about destroying my career but about erasing my entire identity and place in the world. Carson's investigation began paying dividends when he discovered irregularities in the digital records of my alleged corporate espionage. Working with a forensic accountant friend, he traced the suspicious activity on my company accounts and found that someone had been systematically changing my passwords and security questions in the weeks leading up to my termination. The modifications were made from IP addresses that led back to Whitney's apartment building, and the timing coincided perfectly with family gatherings where she would have had access to my personal information. This technical evidence provided the first concrete proof that I had been framed, but gathering enough documentation to clear my name would require months of careful investigation. We decided to conduct surveillance on Whitney to understand the full scope of her operation and identify her co-conspirators. Following her after work, we observed her meeting regularly with Douglas Chen, the CEO of Meridian Legal Group, the competing firm that had benefited from my alleged information leak. Their conversations took place in expensive restaurants and private clubs, settings that suggested a relationship far more intimate than normal business dealings. Carson recognized Douglas from his own professional network and knew that the man had a reputation for aggressive tactics and questionable ethics in acquiring new clients and inside information. Our surveillance revealed that Whitney had been feeding Douglas confidential information about Henderson Klein's client strategies for months before my termination. She had used her position as the innocent sister to gather intelligence during family dinners where I discussed general aspects of my work without revealing specific client details. Whitney would then extrapolate from these conversations and combine them with publicly available information to create valuable insights about our firm's approaches and capabilities. My termination had been planned as the perfect cover story for how Douglas obtained this information, making me the scapegoat for Whitney's systematic corporate espionage. Whitney's fourth major attack came when she filed a police report claiming that I had been stalking her at her apartment and workplace. She provided evidence in the form of security footage that showed a figure resembling me near her building, along with photographs of her car with alleged scratches and damage that she attributed to my harassment. The police report painted me as an increasingly desperate and violent person who blamed Whitney for my professional downfall and was now seeking revenge against my innocent sister. Detective Chen contacted me immediately with a warning that any further contact with Whitney would result in immediate arrest and felony charges. The surveillance footage that Whitney provided had been cleverly manipulated to hide the fact that I had been in that neighborhood for legitimate reasons, conducting my own investigation with Carson. She had waited until she spotted us near her building, then created a narrative that made our presence look like stalking rather than investigation. The scratches on her car were obviously self-inflicted, but combined with the suspicious footage and my lack of an alibi that I could reveal without exposing our investigation, the evidence looked compelling enough to support criminal charges against me. The night I spent in the county jail was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. The holding cell was crowded with women arrested for various offenses, and the atmosphere was charged with desperation and barely controlled violence. I tried calling Carson, Dad, Mom, even Jasmine, but nobody answered their phones or accepted the collect charges. Sitting on that hard metal bench, surrounded by strangers who viewed me with suspicion and hostility, I realized how completely Whitney had isolated me from any support system. She had successfully convinced everyone who mattered that I was dangerous and untrustworthy, leaving me to face the legal system entirely alone. My salvation came from another unexpected source when Diane Foster, Dad's former secretary from his accounting firm, arrived at the jail the next morning with bail money and legal documentation. Diane, a 58-year-old woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, had worked with Dad for 15 years before retiring 6 months earlier. She had been following the family drama from a distance and had grown increasingly suspicious about Whitney's sudden involvement in our family's financial affairs. "That girl has been asking too many questions about your father's business records," Diane told me as we sat in her car outside the jail. Questions that no legitimate family member would need to know the answers to. Diane's revelations opened an entirely new dimension to Whitney's conspiracy. During her final months working for Dad, she had noticed Whitney making regular visits to the office under various pretenses, always when Dad was out meeting clients. Whitney would spend time alone with the filing cabinets and computer systems, claiming she was helping to organize paperwork or prepare documents for family tax purposes. But Diane had seen Whitney photographing financial records and copying information onto flash drives, behavior that seemed suspicious for someone who supposedly just wanted to help with basic administrative tasks. The evidence Diane had gathered painted a picture of Whitney's long-term planning and sophisticated preparation for her attack on our family. She hadn't acted impulsively when she framed me for corporate espionage. She had been gathering intelligence and positioning herself for months to execute a plan that would destroy my credibility while making herself appear as the family's savior and protector. As we sat in Diane's kitchen reviewing documents and bank records, I realized that I was facing an opponent far more dangerous and calculating than I had ever imagined, someone who had turned manipulation and betrayal into an art form that she had been perfecting for years. The scope of Whitney's conspiracy became clear when Diane revealed the financial documents she had secretly copied before retiring from Dad's accounting firm. Whitney's plan wasn't limited to destroying my career and reputation. She was systematically positioning herself to inherit our family's entire estate by proving herself as the responsible, trustworthy daughter while portraying me as unstable and dangerous. The centerpiece of this scheme was a forged will allegedly written by our deceased grandfather, which left his valuable property holdings to the daughter who brings honor to the family name rather than being divided equally between his grandchildren. Whitney had spent months researching our grandfather's handwriting and legal language, creating a document that would surface after our parents' deaths to ensure she inherited everything. She had even gone so far as to plant the fake will in our parents' safe deposit box during a family emergency when Mom needed someone to retrieve important documents from the bank. The forgery was sophisticated enough to fool casual inspection, and by the time anyone thought to have it professionally authenticated, Whitney would be in control of the family's assets and able to influence any investigation into its legitimacy. But Whitney's most devastating betrayal was yet to come. Using the financial information she had stolen from Dad's office, she orchestrated a sophisticated cyber attack on my personal bank accounts. Through identity theft and social engineering, she convinced my bank that I had requested emergency access to my accounts while traveling abroad. The customer service representatives, armed with personal information that only a family member would know, allowed Whitney to reset my passwords and security questions. Within hours, she had transferred my remaining savings of $12,000 to an offshore account that would be virtually impossible to trace. Carson introduced me to Marcus Thompson, Diane's 34-year-old nephew who worked as an IT security consultant for major corporations. Marcus had the technical expertise to trace Whitney's digital footprints and gather the electronic evidence we needed to prove her involvement in the various cybercrimes she had committed. His analysis of the fake emails sent from my account revealed sophisticated spoofing techniques and metadata trails that led directly back to Whitney's personal computer and internet connection. But Marcus warned that gathering admissible evidence would take time, and Whitney seemed to be accelerating her attacks as if she sensed our investigation closing in. The third major betrayal came through Mom, who called me unexpectedly on a Wednesday evening claiming she wanted to discuss reconciliation and healing our family. Her voice sounded warm and loving for the first time since my termination, and she begged me to meet her for lunch so we could talk privately about everything that had happened. Desperate for any connection with my family, I agreed to meet her at our old favorite restaurant downtown, hoping that maybe Mom had finally realized Whitney was lying about me. What I didn't know was that Whitney was listening to our entire conversation through a conference call connection, recording every word I said to use against me later. During our lunch, Mom asked leading questions about my feelings toward Whitney and our family, encouraging me to express my anger and frustration about how I'd been treated. She seemed sympathetic and understanding as I described my pain about being abandoned by everyone I loved, and she even apologized for some of the harsh things she had said during our confrontation. But every emotional response I gave her was being carefully recorded and would later be edited and manipulated to create evidence of my instability and violent tendencies toward our family. Whitney had turned my own mother into an unwitting accomplice in gathering incriminating material that could be used to support criminal charges against me. The psychological manipulation reached new heights when Whitney created a fake email account using a variation of my name that was nearly identical to my actual email address. Using this false identity, she began sending threatening messages to local businesses and community organizations, claiming to represent me and demanding money or making bizarre accusations about conspiracies against our family. The emails were designed to make me appear paranoid and potentially dangerous, while being subtle enough that recipients might not immediately realize they weren't actually from me. This created a pattern of evidence that Whitney could present to authorities as proof of my deteriorating mental state. When I learned about Mom's betrayal through Carson's contacts in the legal community, who had heard about recordings being shared among prosecutors, I felt something break inside me that had never been broken before. The realization that my own mother had been manipulated into betraying me, or worse, had knowingly participated in gathering evidence against me, shattered my remaining faith in family bonds and unconditional love. Whitney hadn't just destroyed my career and reputation. She had corrupted the most sacred relationships in my life and turned the people who were supposed to protect me into weapons for my destruction. Marcus's investigation revealed the final piece of Whitney's master plan when he discovered that she had been systematically documenting every aspect of my decline to build a comprehensive case for having me declared mentally incompetent. The photographs from the private investigator, the recording of my conversation with Mom, the fake threatening emails, and manufactured evidence of stalking were all components of a legal strategy to have me involuntarily committed for psychiatric treatment. Once I was institutionalized, Whitney would have legal grounds to petition for guardianship over my affairs, giving her control over any remaining assets while ensuring I couldn't defend myself or expose her conspiracy. The plan was so thorough and malicious that it took my breath away, and I realized I was fighting for more than just my reputation. I was fighting for my freedom and my sanity against someone who would stop at nothing to destroy me completely. Marcus's forensic analysis finally provided us with concrete evidence when he traced the IP addresses used to access my corporate email accounts during the time of the alleged information leak. The digital fingerprints led directly to Whitney's home internet connection, and the timestamps showed that the suspicious activity occurred during hours when I was verifiably elsewhere, attending continuing education seminars and client meetings. Marcus also discovered that Whitney had installed keylogger software on my laptop during our last family gathering, allowing her to capture my passwords and security credentials for weeks before executing her frame-up operation. Armed with this technical evidence, Carson and I developed a careful strategy to expose Whitney's conspiracy without alerting her to our investigation. We decided to create a trap that would force Whitney to reveal her methods and co-conspirators by making her believe that I was planning to flee the country. Carson helped me book a fake international flight and spread rumors through his legal contacts that I was preparing to disappear rather than face criminal charges for my alleged harassment of former colleagues. We hoped this false information would pressure Whitney into accelerating her timeline and making mistakes that would expose her operation. Our plan seemed to be working when Whitney immediately contacted several people in our social circle to report my supposed flight plans to authorities. She called Detective Chen with urgent warnings that I was about to become a fugitive, and she reached out to the prosecutors handling my case to demand that they issue an immediate arrest warrant before I could leave the country. But Whitney's response revealed something we hadn't expected. She had been monitoring my activities far more closely than we realized, and she somehow knew that our investigation was closing in on her operation. Whitney's counterattack came in the form of a carefully orchestrated media campaign designed to destroy any remaining public sympathy for my situation. She contacted local television reporters with an exclusive story about how our family was being terrorized by my escalating threats and stalking behavior. The news segment featured Whitney tearfully describing her fear for our parents' safety and her heartbreak over my mental breakdown following my termination for corporate espionage. She painted herself as a devoted daughter trying to protect elderly parents from their dangerous, unstable child who refused to accept responsibility for her criminal actions. The television interviews were masterfully performed, with Whitney displaying exactly the right mixture of grief, fear, and reluctant betrayal as she revealed intimate details about my alleged threats against our family. She described finding disturbing writings in my old bedroom that suggested I was planning to make everyone pay for destroying my career. She claimed that I had been sending late-night text messages to our parents with veiled threats about their safety and their finances. Every word was a lie, but Whitney's emotional delivery and apparent reluctance to speak publicly made her story completely convincing to viewers who had no reason to doubt her sincerity. The most devastating part of Whitney's media campaign was her decision to include Tyler in the narrative by having him appear alongside her during the television interviews. Tyler, now 19 and looking uncomfortable but determined, spoke about his fear for our parents' well-being and his heartbreak over my transformation from loving sister to dangerous threat. Whitney had convinced him that speaking publicly was the only way to protect our family and potentially save me by forcing me to get the mental health treatment she claimed I desperately needed. Watching my beloved younger brother describe me as a dangerous person who needed to be stopped felt like dying while still breathing. The public response to Whitney's media appearances was everything she had hoped for and everything I had feared. Local community groups rallied around our family with offers of support and protection from my alleged threats. The police department received dozens of calls from concerned citizens reporting suspicious activities that they now attributed to my stalking of the family. Several local businesses banned me from their premises based on Whitney's warnings about my instability and potential for violence. She had successfully turned my entire community against me and created an environment where any attempt I made to defend myself would be viewed as further evidence of my mental illness and criminal behavior. Carson warned me that Whitney's media campaign was likely a setup for her final attack, designed to make my eventual arrest or institutionalization seem like a necessary protection for public safety. We realized that our careful investigation and evidence gathering might not be enough to overcome the narrative Whitney had created in the court of public opinion. As we watched the news coverage from Carson's home office, surrounded by documents and evidence that proved my innocence, I understood that truth and justice weren't always the same thing, and that sometimes the person who tells the most convincing story wins regardless of what actually happened. Whitney had outmaneuvered us in ways we hadn't anticipated, and I began to wonder if our fight for justice was already lost before it had truly begun. Our first attempt to trap Whitney backfired spectacularly when she turned our fake evidence against us with devastating efficiency. The fabricated flight booking that we had created to make her reveal her surveillance methods was discovered by Detective Chen during her expanded investigation into my flight risk status. When the detective confronted me about the deceptive booking, I couldn't explain my actions without revealing our ongoing investigation, which would compromise Marcus's work and potentially destroy the evidence we had been gathering. Whitney had somehow anticipated our trap and used it to portray me as someone who was actively deceiving law enforcement while planning to flee prosecution. The failure forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth about my situation. I couldn't fight Whitney using her own tactics of deception and manipulation because I lacked her resources, connections, and natural talent for lies. Every attempt I made to be clever or strategic seemed to backfire and provide her with more ammunition to use against me. My legal training had taught me to rely on evidence and logical arguments, but Whitney was fighting a public relations war where perception mattered more than truth and emotional manipulation was more powerful than facts. I was bringing a law textbook to a knife fight, and I was losing badly because I didn't understand the rules of the game she was playing. Carson helped me recognize that my attempts to match Whitney's deviousness were actually damaging my case by making me appear guilty and desperate. "You can't beat her by becoming her," he told me during a difficult conversation in his kitchen. "Your strength has always been your integrity and your commitment to doing the right thing. If you abandon those qualities to fight her on her terms, you'll lose regardless of the outcome because you'll have become everything she's already claiming you are." His words forced me to reevaluate my entire approach to this battle and consider whether trying to expose Whitney was worth sacrificing my own moral principles. The turning point came when a small law firm specializing in employment discrimination offered me a junior associate position despite my damaged reputation. The partners, Helen Morrison and James Liu, had followed my case through Carson's recommendations and believed that my experience being framed for corporate espionage actually made me more qualified to represent clients who had been wrongfully terminated or falsely accused of workplace misconduct. They offered a modest salary and the chance to rebuild my legal career by helping other people who had suffered similar injustices to mine. For the first time in months, I saw a path forward that didn't depend on destroying Whitney but rather on channeling my pain into something constructive and meaningful. Whitney learned about my new job opportunity within days and immediately launched her most sophisticated attack yet. She contacted Helen Morrison directly with concerns about hiring someone under active investigation for harassment and stalking, providing documentation of my alleged criminal behavior and mental instability. Whitney posed as a concerned family member who was trying to protect both me and potential victims from the consequences of my deteriorating condition. She offered to provide character references and background information that would help the firm make an informed decision about whether I was suitable for a position involving client interaction and confidential information. But Whitney had finally overplayed her hand. Helen Morrison was an experienced attorney who had spent decades representing victims of workplace harassment and false accusations. She recognized the tactics Whitney was using because she had seen similar campaigns waged against her clients by vindictive employers and abusive family members. Instead of being intimidated by Whitney's warnings, Helen became suspicious about the coordinated nature of the accusations against me and the convenient timing of Whitney's contact. She agreed to meet with Whitney but secretly recorded the conversation, hoping to gather evidence of the conspiracy against me. During their meeting, Whitney made several crucial mistakes that exposed the calculated nature of her campaign. She provided too much detail about incidents that she couldn't have witnessed firsthand, and she contradicted several key facts that had been established in previous police reports. Most damaging of all, she revealed knowledge of my private conversations and activities that she couldn't have known without conducting illegal surveillance. Helen's questioning exposed inconsistencies in Whitney's timeline and motivations that made it clear she was lying about her concerns for my well-being and her family's safety. The recording of Whitney's conversation with Helen provided the first direct evidence of her lies and manipulation, but it also revealed something even more important. Whitney was beginning to crack under the pressure of maintaining her complex web of deceptions. She had become overconfident in her ability to manipulate people and situations, and she was starting to make mistakes that could be used against her. Helen agreed to hire me despite Whitney's objections, and she offered to help Carson build a legal case against Whitney for harassment, defamation, and conspiracy. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had allies who understood the true nature of what I was fighting and who possessed the skills to help me win. The decision to accept Helen's job offer and focus on rebuilding my career rather than seeking revenge against Whitney marked a fundamental shift in my approach to this crisis. I realized that my best chance for vindication wasn't in destroying Whitney but in proving through my actions and achievements that her accusations about my character were false. Building a successful career helping other victims of false accusations would demonstrate my true nature far more effectively than any evidence or legal proceeding could. I was finally ready to stop letting Whitney define my life and start reclaiming my identity on my own terms, regardless of what she continued to do to try to stop me. Marcus's breakthrough came when he discovered backup servers that Whitney hadn't known existed, containing archived emails that proved her conspiracy had been planned for over 2 years. The messages between Whitney and Douglas Chen revealed that their relationship was both personal and professional, with Whitney providing confidential information about our family's finances and my career prospects in exchange for money and promises of advancement at his firm. But the most shocking revelation was that Whitney had been planning to destroy my relationship with our parents long before she framed me for corporate espionage, viewing me as an obstacle to her inheritance plans that needed to be eliminated through systematic character assassination. The archived emails also revealed Whitney's ultimate goal. She had been maneuvering to have our parents declared incompetent so she could gain legal control over their finances and medical decisions. Her campaign against me was designed to position herself as the responsible, trustworthy daughter while portraying me as too unstable and criminal to be trusted with family responsibilities. Whitney had been gradually isolating our parents from their longtime friends and advisors, replacing them with people who were loyal to her and who would support her eventual petition for guardianship. She wasn't just trying to inherit our family's money. She was planning to control our parents' lives completely. Armed with this devastating evidence, Carson arranged for a confrontation at his law office with all the principal parties present. Helen Morrison agreed to represent me during the meeting, while Dad brought his attorney and Mom insisted on having Whitney present for moral support. The atmosphere in Carson's conference room was electric with tension as we prepared to reveal the truth about Whitney's conspiracy. I had been dreading and anticipating this moment for months, knowing that it would either vindicate me completely or provide Whitney with the opportunity to destroy me once and for all with some final manipulation I hadn't anticipated. Carson began the presentation methodically, walking through the technical evidence that Marcus had gathered about the corporate espionage and identity theft. He showed the digital fingerprints that traced all the suspicious activity back to Whitney's personal devices and internet connections. Dad's attorney tried to interrupt several times, claiming that the evidence was fabricated or obtained illegally, but Carson had been careful to ensure that everything was documented properly and would be admissible in court. Mom sat silent and pale as the overwhelming proof of Whitney's lies mounted with each piece of evidence Carson presented. Whitney's response was a masterclass in manipulation that almost worked despite all the evidence against her. She broke down in convincing tears, claiming that her relationship with Douglas Chen had been an innocent friendship that he had exploited to gain information about our family. She insisted that any suspicious activity on her devices must have been the result of hacking by vindictive business associates who wanted to damage both our families. She portrayed herself as another victim of the same conspiracy that had destroyed my career, someone who had been naive enough to trust the wrong people and was now being framed alongside me for crimes she never committed. But Whitney's performance contained the same overconfidence that had exposed her to Helen Morrison. She provided too many details about technical aspects of the hacking and surveillance that she couldn't have known without being directly involved. She contradicted statements she had made to police and reporters about her knowledge of my activities and whereabouts. Most damaging of all, she revealed information about the forged will and the guardianship plans that Marcus had discovered in her private communications, trying to explain them away as contingency planning for our parents' protection rather than evidence of her long-term conspiracy. The moment when Whitney finally lost control came when Tyler arrived unexpectedly at the meeting, having driven home from college after Carson contacted him with evidence of the conspiracy. Tyler confronted Whitney directly about the lies she had told him about me, and her mask finally slipped completely. She screamed at him about being ungrateful and not understanding what she had sacrificed to protect this family from Brooke's insanity. The rage and entitlement in her voice as she berated Tyler for questioning her authority revealed the true person behind all the tears and manipulation. Dad and Mom watched in shock as their perfect daughter transformed into someone they didn't recognize. Whitney's final desperate move was to claim that all the evidence against her had been fabricated by me and my co-conspirators as part of an elaborate revenge plot. She accused Marcus of being my accomplice in creating fake digital evidence, and she insisted that Carson was helping me frame her because of some personal grudge against our family. She even suggested that the backup servers had been tampered with and that the archived emails were sophisticated forgeries designed to make her look guilty. But by this point, the evidence was so overwhelming and her explanations so contradictory that even Mom couldn't pretend to believe her anymore. The meeting ended with Whitney storming out of the conference room, screaming threats about lawsuits and promising that she would make everyone pay for believing lies about her. But the damage was done, her mask had completely slipped, and everyone in that room had seen the calculating, manipulative person she really was beneath all her performances of innocence and concern. Dad sat in stunned silence, staring at the evidence of how thoroughly Whitney had deceived him, while Mom wept quietly as she realized how badly she had misjudged both of her daughters. Tyler grabbed my hand and whispered, "I'm so sorry," with tears streaming down his face, and for the first time in months, I felt like I might have my brother back. Whitney's downfall was swift once the full extent of her crimes was revealed to authorities. The evidence Marcus had gathered provided prosecutors with clear proof of identity theft, wire fraud, computer crimes, and harassment that resulted in federal charges carrying potential prison sentences of up to 20 years. Douglas Chen was arrested as a co-conspirator when investigators found evidence that he had been paying Whitney for confidential information and had helped her plan the frame-up that destroyed my career. The investigation expanded to include other suspicious cases at Meridian Legal Group where inside information had been used to damage competitors, revealing a pattern of corporate espionage that had been operating for years. The personal consequences for Whitney were equally devastating as her professional relationships and social connections crumbled under the weight of public exposure. The same community leaders and family friends who had rallied around her during her media campaign now felt betrayed and manipulated by her elaborate lies. Local news stations ran follow-up stories about the conspiracy, interviewing people who had been deceived by Whitney's performances and legal experts who explained how sophisticated her manipulation tactics had been. Whitney became infamous as a cautionary tale about how family members can become the most dangerous enemies when money and inheritance are involved. The destruction of our family relationships was perhaps the most tragic consequence of Whitney's conspiracy. Mom and Dad's marriage couldn't survive the revelation that Dad had been hiding massive debt while Whitney manipulated their family loyalty for her personal gain. They divorced quietly 6 months after the truth came out, with Dad moving to a small apartment across town and Mom selling the family home to pay legal bills and settle debts. The foundation of trust that had held our family together for decades had been shattered beyond repair, and none of us knew how to rebuild relationships that had been poisoned by so much deception and betrayal. Tyler chose to live with me while finishing his college degree, unable to forgive our parents for how quickly they had abandoned me based on Whitney's lies. The experience had shattered his faith in family bonds and unconditional love, leaving him struggling with trust issues and anger that affected his relationships and academic performance. We spent countless hours in therapy together, working through the trauma of discovering that the people who were supposed to protect us could be turned into weapons against us by someone skilled in manipulation and emotional abuse. My decision not to pursue civil lawsuits against Whitney for the damages she had caused surprised many people, including Carson and Helen, who believed I deserved significant compensation for the financial and emotional harm I had suffered. But I realized that continuing to fight Whitney would keep me trapped in a cycle of anger and revenge that would prevent me from moving forward with my life. Instead, I chose to channel my experience into building a law practice that specialized in helping other victims of family manipulation, workplace harassment, and false accusations. The skills I had learned while defending myself became invaluable tools for protecting other people facing similar attacks on their reputations and livelihoods. The law firm I established with Helen Morrison grew rapidly as word spread about our expertise in cases involving sophisticated manipulation and conspiracy. We helped employees who had been framed by vindictive supervisors, family members who were being manipulated by relatives seeking control of inheritances, and individuals whose reputations had been destroyed by coordinated campaigns of lies and character assassination. Each client's victory felt like a vindication of my own struggle, and I discovered that helping others reclaim their lives and identities was far more satisfying than any revenge against Whitney could ever have been. Tyler graduated law school 3 years later and joined our firm, specializing in cases involving young adults who had been manipulated or abused by family members. His personal experience with Whitney's deception gave him unique insights into how predatory relatives operate and how to help victims recognize manipulation tactics before they become completely isolated from support systems. Working together to protect other families from experiencing what we had endured became a way for us to transform our trauma into something meaningful and constructive. The most important lesson I learned from this experience was that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what truly matters in life. Whitney was right about one thing: I was a disgrace to the family she wanted me to be, the family that prioritized appearances and financial success over honesty and genuine love. But I became exactly the person I needed to be by refusing to let her destroy my integrity and my commitment to helping others. The family I built with Tyler and our chosen relationships proved stronger and more authentic than any bonds based on shared blood or inheritance expectations. As I watched Tyler address a conference of legal professionals about family manipulation tactics today, I'm reminded that our greatest victories often come from refusing to become the worst version of ourselves even when we're fighting the worst people in our lives. Whitney tried to turn me into someone bitter, vengeful, and broken, but she ultimately failed because she underestimated the power of choosing hope over hatred and service over selfishness. The woman who once screamed at me to leave because I was a disgrace could never have imagined that her cruelty would inspire me to become someone dedicated to protecting others from the kind of pain she inflicted on me. What lessons have you learned from betrayal in your own life? Have you ever had to choose between revenge and rebuilding when someone tried to destroy everything you cared about? Share your thoughts in the comments below because your story might help someone else who's facing their own Whitney right now. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find hope in their darkest moments, and make sure to subscribe for more true stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding strength in unexpected places. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who might need to hear that survival is possible even when the people who should love you most become your greatest enemies. Thank you for listening to my story and for believing that truth and integrity still matter in a world that sometimes rewards the loudest lies. Remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to treat yourself and others when everything falls apart. May you find the courage to leave behind anyone who calls you a disgrace for being authentically yourself, and may you discover that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose and build through love, respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being.